LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the July 15th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's dozen best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use, media criticism, and political analysis show for you all tonight. The political comedy source, well, there's no Real Time with Bill Maher, there's no Saturday Night Live, but there were several comical moments in the hearings with Peter Strzok, the Congressional hearings on Thursday. I took a brief clip from the hearings just from the Fox. It was on all the networks, and I thought there was sort of a joke and a joke back, sort of, I don't know, from Peter Strzok in the hearings. That'll be the first clip. But then, of course, the big topic that you see listed in the title and down in my video description is Trump Loves Putin Act 2. The Act 2 really refers to the second big set of Russian indictments from Robert Mueller's investigation, and possibly the last one that won't include Americans. It seems like there's some other that this is going to be a 3-act indictment, and we just saw Act 2. That's what the Act 2 means in the title, which I will discuss more as we get through the show. I have a link down in the video description to my clip list of my dozen clips if you want to try to follow along. You might be able to figure out what my notes mean, but you'll at least probably be able to figure out, who's talking in the clip and what it's generally about. All of my clips, other than that, all the clips come from the big 5 corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And I will have some news summaries. I will have a clip of Donald Trump on CBS Face the Nation, or actually interviewed by the CBS Evening News, but they had an excerpt on CBS's Face the Nation where it seems like Donald Trump doesn't know where his own father was born. That's something you get to look forward to. Rand Paul seems to think that Russia's gotten kind of a raw deal from NATO since the fall of the Soviet Union. That'll be the last clip if you want to wait for that. I do have a bonus Sandy and Dash clip at the end for the Sandy and Dash fans out there. Both Sandy and Dash will be in that final clip, which you don't have to watch if you don't want to watch all the way to the end. But as I promised, I'm going to start off with a joke from Peter Strzok responding to kind of a weird statement from, this is a Representative Paul Gosar. He's a Republican from Arizona, and apparently he's a dentist, as he makes clear near the beginning of this clip that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
So you said about a bias. This morning I watched. By the way, I'm a dentist. Okay, so I read body language very, very well. And I watched your comment and actions with Mr. Gowdy. You got very angry in regards to the Gold Star father. That shows me that it's innately a part of you and a bias.
Sir, I disagree. I don't know if you're saying this experience is like being at the dentist, if that's what you're suggesting. Okay, so let me I would tell you, sir, what you see in my response is a genuine passion for the United States of America. What you see is a passion as a patriot. What you see is a genuine anger at people.
I got 2 more questions.
Gentlemen, I got 2 more Arizona controls the time.
So, yeah, I thought that was kind of a big, nice burn back from Peter Strzok. If you watched the hearings, I think actually Peter Strzok came across looking pretty well. As well as anyone can look after the opposition has looked through all of your private text messages with your illicit lover for some period of time and during a political campaign. And he basically said that his political biases didn't affect his work, and there was no actual evidence that it did, although I don't think that I think FBI agents' political biases affect their work all the time, so I'm not completely on Peter Strzok's side, but that kind of came up, but this indictment on Friday almost like wiped out that news from Thursday. It's one of those Donald Trump weeks, I guess, where the news moves so fast that by the time you're watching this tomorrow, it's already going to be whatever Trump said in his press conference with Putin. And I actually have some thoughts I'm going to give about that a little bit later. But one of the reasons it's so up in the air is because Trump has been kind of treating Putin and the the other dictators from around the world, like at the NATO summit, he was like palling with Erdogan from Turkey, and of course he says nice things about Kim Jong-un, and so he seems to, and of course he kind of joked that he'd like to be president for life, like President Xi in China. So, he seems to have this affinity for dictators, and then when he's with our democratic allies, he doesn't really seem to like them as much as he likes these dictators. And so that's why one of the questions where Donald Trump's answer, this is the Trump clip. I wanted to show this before the news summaries because there'll be summaries of this clip in a couple of the news summaries I'm going to show you. And this is where Donald Trump is talking about whether Europe is, who are America's foes? Who are our foes? And the first foe he comes up with is the European Union. And this is also a clip, as I promised earlier, where if you listen carefully, Donald Trump does not know where his father was born, as I will discuss with you after we watch this clip together from CBS's Face the Nation this morning over here.
Competitor, your biggest foe globally right now?
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade. Now, you wouldn't think of the European Union, but they're a foe. Russia's a foe in certain respects. China's a foe economically, certainly. They're a foe. But that doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean anything. It means that they're competitors. They want to do well, and we want to do well. And we're starting to do well. You see what's going on. We have the best employment numbers probably that we've ever had. Black unemployment is the lowest level in history. Hispanic unemployment, the lowest level in history, Jeff. Women unemployment, lowest in 66 years. Our numbers are great. Our GDP numbers are far greater than what they thought.
A lot of people might be surprised to hear you list the EU as a foe before China and Russia.
No, I look at them all. Look, EU is very difficult. I want to tell you, maybe the thing that's most difficult, don't forget, both my parents were born in EU sectors, okay? I mean, my mother was Scotland, my father was Germany, and, I love those countries. I respect the leaders of those countries, but in a trade sense, they've really taken advantage of us, and many of those countries are in NATO, and they weren't paying their bills. And, I, as an example...
So, I don't know if you caught near the end there, he said that, he said in sectors, if maybe that's his wiggle room on that, but he pretty much said his mother was born in Scotland and his father was born in Germany. His mother was born in Scotland. His father was born in New York, of German heritage, but I don't know what to make of the fact that Donald Trump just said his father was born in Germany when his father was actually born in New York, and I didn't see anyone comment on that. But you also saw the greater context of that faux comment, and next thing I'm going to show you is CNN State of the Union with Jake Tapper. That actually, for your benefit, I watched 3 hours of State of the Union because they were all live. Jake Tapper did a 2-hour show from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. Pacific time, my time, and then came back at 9 a.m. and did another live show, but with recorded excerpts from the previous 2 hours that didn't have all the same content. And so this first clip is actually going to be the original news summary, but with one little excerpt added in there where they updated it for the EU response to being the foe of the United States. So you'll see there's like a little edit into this, but the rest of it is the big news summary from 5 a.m. this morning. And if you watch carefully, you'll see it says what time it is in the corner during the clip. So that's also how you can tell when I've edited in something from 3 hours later. And this is a 3-minute news summary, which I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
We are live from Helsinki, Finland, and you're watching a special edition of State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. You can see the presidential palace behind me. That's where President Trump will meet with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, in just under 24 hours. The stakes for this one-on-one summit rose dramatically this week after President Trump's own Justice Department announced new charges and indictments against 12 Russian military intelligence officers as part of the special counsel's investigation, accusing the 12 of interfering in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. In a brand new interview, President Trump is laying out his approach to the summit and saying that he does not expect much.
Nothing bad's going to come out of it, and maybe some good will come out. But I go in with low expectations. I'm not going in with high expectations. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I can tell you what I'll be asking for, and we'll see if something comes of it.
In that same interview with CBS, the president also said this.
I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade. Now, you wouldn't think of the European Union, but they're a foe. Russia's a foe in certain respects. China's a foe economically, certainly. They're a foe. But that doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean anything.
Just moments ago, the president of the European Union, directly responding to President Trump, said, quote, America and the EU are best friends. Whoever says we are foes is spreading fake news. As we speak, in the same interview and in a series of tweets this weekend, President Trump blamed the Obama administration and Democrats for allowing themselves to be hacked by the Russians. The person that President Trump has yet to condemn for any of this, Russian President Vladimir Putin. CNN is covering every angle of the summit, but first I do want to note, we invited the White House to join us this morning to offer their perspective on this important summit. The White House confirmed an interview with National Security Advisor Ambassador John Bolton. The CNN arranged our show and schedules and crews accordingly, and then the White House canceled the interview for, quote, bad behavior. What was the, quote, disrespect the White House took issue with? Well, 9 minutes after President Trump attacked CNN unprompted during a press conference in the UK, our correspondent tried to ask the president a question. Take a listen.
John Roberts, go ahead, John. No. John Roberts, go ahead. CNN's fake news. I don't take questions. I don't take questions from CNN. CNN is fake news. I don't take questions from CNN. John Roberts of Fox. Let's go to a real. Let's go to a real network. John, let's go.
Well, we're a real network too, sir.
We're told that Ambassador Bolton was prepared to do the interview, and we invite him to join us or anyone at the White House anytime.
So, yeah, Jake Tapper did mention that several times during the 3 hours of the show that, or I think at least 3 times, that they were supposed to have Ambassador or National Security Advisor John Bolton on the show. And after that whole kerfuffle there where Donald Trump called CNN fake news because they were trying to ask a question, or first called them fake news when, like, NBC asked a question, and said, where are you from? Oh, NBC? Oh, I should have known. You're almost as bad as CNN. Fake news. He said earlier, that was the 9 minutes before the clip that you just saw Jake Tapper play. And then there was that back and forth with Jim Acosta, the CNN reporter, and then John Roberts from Fox News just like stepped right up and said, oh, I'll ask a question. And he said, oh, yeah, I'll talk to John Roberts. That's a real network, right? Or, And then a couple hours later, John Roberts of Fox News tried to show some solidarity with CNN. But I'm surprised that when Donald Trump was listing his list of foes there, he didn't mention CNN after all of that. And I love that EU response to the, faux news is fake news. Because I remember when I used to do all my Fox News bias videos, people used to call Fox News faux news, F-A-U-X, right? Faux news. So, I mean, faux news is fake news already, but this is F-O-E news, is faux fake news, I guess. But anyway, I wanted to get on to the next news summary, which is much more comprehensive, especially about this indictment. But one thing I wanted to point out, I was reading the comments before I started the show, and I saw this one from Daniel Forrester, where he was catching up on my show last week, and I was saying how, they put Giuliani on the show right at the last minute after all the guests were announced. Why is Giuliani going on 3 shows at the last minute? They must know something big is coming up. And apparently it was this big indictment, which, like I said, is covered a lot more extensively by NBC News' Meet the Press. This is Chuck Todd this morning, about, I think it's 4 minutes, 22 seconds, which I will discuss with you after we watch that together over here.
It turns out it wasn't somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds. Even before Friday's indictments of 12 Russian intelligence operatives for hacking the Democrats during the 2016 campaign, 4 U.S. intelligence agencies had already weighed in. The FBI, the CIA, the DNI, and the NSA, all of them had concluded that Russians interfered in the 2016 election, and they did so with the goal of helping Donald Trump. In fact, you could view the Russian hacking of Democratic emails, opposition research, turnout models as the Watergate burglary of the 2016 election, the political crime of the 21st century. Now, as in 1972, the central crime is the penetration of the DNC by hostile actors. Then, the hostile actor was the Nixon White House. Now, it's the Russian government. And as in 1972, the White House, this one, was quick to distance itself from this crime. The Trump White House quickly put out a statement pointing out that there were, quote, no allegations of knowing involvement by anyone in the Trump campaign. That's true, at least for now, in this indictment. What President Trump didn't do was express outrage over the Russian hacking. What he did do was to reaffirm his claim that the Mueller investigation is a witch hunt and tweet that the Russian criminality took place during the Obama administration and that it failed to respond. What the president didn't do was postpone his summit on Monday with Vladimir Putin. What he did do was signal, perhaps, that he trusts Putin's denials over the findings of his intelligence agencies and his Justice Department, leaving much of the world asking why.
I think I'd have a very good relationship with President Putin if we spend time together.
The indictment of 12 Russian military intelligence officers just 3 days before Monday's one-on-one meeting is the most detailed account yet of Russia's attack on America's democracy.
I briefed President Trump about these allegations earlier this week. We need to work together to hold the perpetrators accountable.
But despite that briefing, Mr. Trump spent the week praising Putin.
He's not my enemy. Hopefully someday, maybe he'll be a friend.
Rattling the alliance established to contain Soviet and now Russian aggression, NATO. Insulting the British Prime Minister on her Brexit strategy in a British newspaper.
I would have done it much differently. She didn't listen to me.
And most notably, attacking his own Justice Department and the special counsel probe tasked with investigating Russian interference in the 2016 election.
I call it the rigged witch hunt. I think that really hurts our country, and it really hurts our relationship with Russia.
The indictment fills in the gaps of several extraordinary moments in the summer of 2016 and raises questions about the Trump campaign's role in the attack on the United States by a foreign power. First, there's the infamous Trump Tower meeting. June 3rd, Donald Trump Jr. is promised dirt on Hillary Clinton through a Kremlin intermediary, replying, "If it's what you say, I love it," especially later in the summer. June 8th, the indictment says Russian intelligence officers launch DCLeaks.com and begin to release stolen DNC emails. A day later, Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort meet in Trump Tower with Russians tied to the Kremlin. Second, the indictment reveals that on July 27th, Russian hackers tried for the first time to hack into servers in Clinton's personal campaign office. It is the same day Mr. Trump said this about Clinton's emails.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Mr. Trump has consistently questioned the conclusion of his own intelligence agencies.
President Putin really feels, and he feels strongly, that he did not meddle in our election.
He has even denied the hacking of the DNC and Clinton's campaign occurred.
She doesn't know if it's the Russians doing the hacking. Maybe there is no hacking. It also could be somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds, okay?
Though Mr. Trump says he will bring up hacking with Putin in their Monday meeting, on Friday, he was dismissive.
I don't think you'll have any, gee, I did it, you got me. There won't be a Perry Mason here, I don't think, but you never know what happens, right?
And joining me now from Helsinki.
So, yeah, that was a great news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press. They even, gave you the clip of Donald Trump on July 27th, 2016, saying, "Russia, if you're listening, please hack Hillary Clinton's emails or get Hillary Clinton's missing emails." And the fact that if you read the latest Mueller indictment from Friday, you read paragraph 44. It actually says after hours. So that they're it's almost like we're putting this paragraph in there so that you can match it up with what Donald Trump did that day. Although they never make the connection in the indictment, but if you read paragraph 44 of the indictment, you'll see it makes it pretty clear that the Russian hackers, for the first time, tried to hack Hillary Clinton's third-party server, or whatever it says in paragraph 44, after hours the same day, in the morning, that Donald Trump said, Russia, if you're listening, hack, get her missing emails. And so that was one of many things that was interesting in the indictment. A little bit of it made it over into Fox News world, but in nothing like what you just saw, nothing about all the huge misbehavior by Donald Trump that was chronicled so well in that last 4-minute 20-second or 4-minute 22-second clip from Meet the Press there. This is the Fox News Sunday news summary, starting with Chris Wallace. And like I said, there's a little bit about, the indictment, and they give all sides. They even give Putin's side in here, though I guess they sort of gave Putin's side in that last news summary as well. One thing I noticed, they never say who. They said, that they were attempting to throw the election. They never say who for. If you watch this report, it's Chris Wallace and then throwing over to, their reporter John Roberts, who also never mentions the whole thing with CNN, even though he was the one who came to President Trump's rescue and took a question from him when he wouldn't take a question from CNN, even though when Obama tried to freeze out Fox News several years ago, all the other networks came to Fox News' defense. But anyway, that's something else that I'm critical of not coming up in this news summary, which I will discuss a little with you more after we watch it together. Chris Wallace, John Roberts, Fox News Sunday this morning here.
Today in Finland. Monday's summit will be the first in-depth meeting between the two leaders as they discuss trouble spots across the globe. But casting a shadow over the summit, the new indictment of Russian intelligence officers for interfering in the 2016 election. In a moment, we'll discuss expectations for the talks with U.S. Ambassador to Russia, John Huntsman. And tomorrow, I'll sit down for an exclusive interview with President Putin on Fox News Channel and get first word on what the two leaders discussed. But first, let's bring in Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts here in Helsinki. John.
Chris, good afternoon to you. President Trump is lowering expectations for what might come out of tomorrow's summit here in Helsinki, saying it might not amount to much. But one thing is clear, these two leaders do have an awful lot to talk about. President Trump is seeking to distance himself from the Friday indictment of 12 Russian agents for meddling in the 2016 election. The president tweeting, "These Russian individuals did their work during the Obama years. Why didn't Obama do something about it? Because he thought crooked Hillary would win. That's why." On Friday, the Deputy Attorney General said there was definitely an attempt by Russian operatives to throw the election.
The conspirators created fictitious online personas, including DC Leaks and Gosar 2.0. And they used those personas to release information. They discussed the timing of the release in an attempt to enhance the impact on the election.
President Trump promised he will bring up Russian meddling in the election when he meets with Putin. Back home, Democrats declared there is no way the two leaders should meet in private.
There should be no one-on-one meeting between this president and Mr. Putin. There needs to be other Americans in the room.
Putin has repeatedly denied any Russian involvement in election meddling, an assertion repeated by President Trump just 2 weeks ago. The indictments would seem to tell a different story. Despite assessments from members of his own party that the president appears eager to cozy up to Putin, even as he slams America's allies, President Trump insists he is holding Putin to account.
I guarantee whoever it is in Russia, they're saying, oh, gee, do we wish that Trump was not the victor in that election. We have been far tougher on Russia than anybody.
British diplomats tell Fox News that President Trump has indeed been tough on Russia, but there are concerns that in looking to improve relations with Vladimir Putin, the president might give away too much. For example, at that Friday press conference at Chequers with Theresa May, the president told me he did think it was possible for the United States and Russia to improve relations even if Russia continues to occupy Crimea. Chris?
John Roberts reporting here in Helsinki. John.
And actually, one surprising clip that did come out on Fox News Sunday that I didn't take was from that John Huntsman, Ambassador John Huntsman, the Trump administration's ambassador to Russia. He wouldn't rule out Trump giving Crimea, or saying that it's okay with the U.S. that if Russia keeps Crimea, that he wouldn't rule it out. He said it was very unlikely, but that's not the clip I'm going to take. I will have a clip a little later from Fox News Sunday, but I want to contrast with some of the other clips. I hope you like the way I contrasted the Fox News summary there with the NBC Meet the Press news summary before it, which, if you like it, you can give me a thumbs up down there. It's always helpful if you give me a thumbs up or a supportive comment. You can let me know down in the comment section, live comments, recorded comments, and now that I've finished the news summaries, ABC didn't have one, I think because George Stephanopoulos was off in Helsinki. They were all off in Helsinki except for, you saw Chuck Todd, and I don't know why Chuck Todd didn't get to go to Helsinki. Maybe he didn't want to go, but this next clip is Chuck Todd, where he not only in the news summary I showed, really emphasized that July 27th point of from paragraph 44 of the indictment, where it says that they went and tried to hack Hillary Clinton's personal server for the first time on July 27th, after hours, when Donald Trump in the mornings asked Russia, if you're listening, go out and get Hillary's emails. Well, that is one of the questions that Chuck Todd also asked Senator Mark Warner. And I don't know why I'm going to contrast this to another Mark Warner clip from CNN State of the Union after this, where he does almost a mirror image. You'll see he won't say, oh, I won't say there's collusion, won't say there's collusion. There might be collusion, but we're going to have to wait and see. Then you'll see in the next clip with Jake Tapper over on CNN State of the Union, he's almost the opposite. Don't forget, there's all this evidence of collusion. But here he is responding to Chuck Todd, hitting home that whole July 27th thing in a way that I think is, I don't know if anything will come of it, but it is an odd coincidence. I guess we'll find out. And here's that clip, which I will discuss with you after we watch together.
New, and what you said, you learned a lot new in this. And one of the things I want to ask you about is, in the indictment, we learned that on the same day, on or about July 27th, that these Russian intelligence agents attempted after hours to spearfish for the first time emails associated with Clinton's personal office and the Clinton campaign. And this happened on the day of this infamous soundbite from then candidate Donald Trump, July 27th, 2016.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Was this a new piece of evidence to you, Senator Warner?
Well, it appears a rather strange coincidence that the very day that Mr. Trump calls on the Russians to hack into Clinton emails, well, the Russian spies actually tried to take that action. And remember, that call for the Russians to act came a few weeks after Donald Trump Jr.'s son, his son-in-law, his campaign manager, had all sat down with Russian agents in the Trump Tower, where the Russian agents had offered dirt on Hillary Clinton. Clearly, you take that, you take the efforts to reach out to Trump aide, Mr. Papadopoulos, where Russians were offering dirt. There is a pattern of behavior here that I think, at the end of the day, I hope Mueller gets to the bottom of.
All right, you brought up the Trump Tower meeting. In fact, we learned about a new piece of the timeline in the Trump Tower meeting in between when the meeting happened and when it was set up. The Russian operatives set up a website called DCLeaks.com literally the day before the Trump Tower meeting. Perhaps that was a way of a proof of what they had to the folks they were meeting there. Is all of this, July 27th and the Trump Tower meeting and what we've learned now, is that circumstantial evidence of collusion?
Again, I'm going to leave those conclusions to the public, leave those conclusions to seeing what else Mueller has.
What about you? Does that look like collusion to you?
What I'm saying, Chuck, is we've got further witnesses we're going to interview. But one thing we do know, just within the public domain, clearly there were a lot of folks affiliated with the Russian government reaching out to a whole series of folks within the Trump orbit, trying to offer information to discriminating and bad information about Clinton. And again, just based upon Donald Trump Jr.'s response, where he said he was pretty anxious to get that kind of information.
Reading the indictment.
So that's Mark Warner over on NBC's Meet the Press, where he keeps saying, we need more information, but before we know if there's any collusion. And he's really an important senator because he's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I'm going to contrast him with the much more gung-ho ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, in the clip after next. But before I get to that, I promised this sort of mirror image Mark Warner, where he's responding to this question from Jake Tapper about, this is with a clip from Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA, who says that this indictment is going to be like the last indictment before the next big indictment that's actually going to have the Americans who cooperated in it, which is kind of what I was talking about. The title of this video has like Trump loves Russia Act 2 ? Because there's going to be an Act 3, and this is one of the clips. This may be the clip that talks the most about Act 3. I can't remember. I think there might be one other, but also in this clip, as I promised, you'll see Mark Warner react to that by sort of like taking the other side of the argument that he took in the last clip, where he's like says, no, there is all this evidence of collusion, which I will discuss with you after we watch that minute 58-second clip from CNN's State of the Union, Jake Tapper interviewing Senator Mark Warner over here.
After the indictments were issued, Michael Hayden, President Bush's former CIA director, said to me that the next indictments he anticipates when they come will likely name American citizens. Take a listen.
The more this goes, the richer in detail we get, the more I begin to believe that we're probably going to see a widening circle here of people becoming involved. I would not be surprised if this were not the last indictment we see that doesn't mention an American.
Do you anticipate indictments of American citizens next?
Well, Jake, I'm not sure what Mr. Mueller is going to do next. I do know that we have in the public domain the fact that Russian agents reached out to Mr. Papadopoulos, a Trump campaign official. We know that Russian agents met with Trump's son, his son-in-law, and his then campaign manager to try to offer dirt on Hillary Clinton. We know from the indictments that Mueller put out on Friday that the very day that Mr. Trump called on the Russians to try to hack into the Clinton emails, well, Russian spies actually that day did try to attempt to hack into the Clinton campaign. So I would not be surprised at all if whatever is coming next from Mr. Mueller might end up involving Americans. Let's face it, there are a number of individuals, from Trump's former national security advisor, General Flynn, to his deputy campaign manager and others, who are cooperating with the government. I don't know what that cooperation involves, but I believe we've not seen the results of all that work yet.
But just to ask you, do you have any hesitation criticizing?
So, yeah, there you can see that Michael Hayden clip I was talking about. And am I crazy, or was Mark Warner making the sort of like mirror argument from the previous clip where all of a sudden he was like counting up all the evidence of collusion instead of saying, oh, we got to wait and see what the evidence of collusion is going to be? But I think Adam Schiff is a much more, like I said, forthright, gung-ho advocate of the problems that I think are coming from the Mueller investigation for the Trump administration with I don't know if it's going to be collusion with Russia. I mean, collusion isn't a legal word anyway, but cooperation with Russian hacking into the Democrats and the release of the information, which was what these latest indictments were about, or the previous indictments, which were about the like disinformation campaign launched over social media, also Russia-based, and apparently ordered by Vladimir Putin, unless the entire, like, the GRU has gone rogue, which seems hard to believe. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. So the person who is really explaining this much more forcefully than Mark Warner, Mark Warner's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. This is Adam Schiff on the on the House Intelligence Committee, also talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union. And these two questions are like the biggest softball questions ever from Jake Tapper, I think. First he says, you're a former prosecutor. As a prosecutor, what does this indictment look like to you? And then I think the follow-up question is like asking him about the July 27th meeting, the coincidence of the July 27th meeting, which isn't like a confrontational question to ask the Democrat in charge of, raising the profile of the Russia investigation. So this is actually about 5 minutes long, but like I said, this is the vigorous Democratic explanation of the facts so far in the Russia investigation. It starts with an introduction from Jake Tapper of some facts about the hacking indictment that make it seem likely that Putin must have ordered it. That's what I was talking about before. And anyway, I will discuss this clip with you after we watch it together over here.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I am Jake Tapper in Helsinki, Finland. We are live from Alas Sea Pool in Helsinki. Tomorrow's Trump-Putin summit is taking place in the shadow of Friday's indictments of 12 Russian military intelligence officials. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announcing the charges, detailing a Russian scheme to hack the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 and arranging the release of the stolen goods to influence the election. National security experts say there's just no way this campaign by Russia's primary military intelligence agency would have happened without the direct approval of Vladimir Putin. And Russian election meddling continues to this day. President Trump's own intelligence chief said Friday, quote, "The warning lights are blinking red," unquote. Joining me now is Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He's the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Schiff, thanks so much for joining us. Do me a favor, step outside your role as a Democratic congressman for just one moment and talk to us about this indictment as a former prosecutor. You worked in the Los Angeles branch of the U.S. Attorney's Office for 6 years. What do you see in the Friday indictments that other people, non-lawyers, non-prosecutors, might not see?
Well, what I always look at in these indictments is what is included and what is left out. And included here you have a Russian military intelligence-driven operation that is taking place simultaneously with another operation by the Internet Research Agency that's focused on social media. So you have these two different operations, both with the same object of interfering in our election, trying to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. But you also have the Russians probing and exfiltrating data from voter registration databases, going into a vendor for the software provided to voting systems, and seeking to obtain that software with the potential aim in the future of intervening more heavily. And finally, you have this very direct reference on July 27th, including the time of day in which the Russians for the first time go after a Clinton server, really seeming to heed the call that day of Donald Trump to hack Hillary Clinton's emails. And that's very interesting to me, because why do you include that but exclude any mention of the Russians telling Papadopoulos that they have these same stolen materials? It says to me, much like the first indictment made no mention of the Russian hacking scheme, the second indictment on the Russian hacking scheme also leaves a lot unsaid that may be the subject of a third indictment involving U.S. persons, or that report to the Justice Department by Bob Mueller.
Yeah, let's talk about the July 27th, because on July 27th, 2016, in the middle of the Democratic National Convention, after, according to the indictment, Russians had hacked into the DNC emails and then arranged through Organization 1, which we know to be WikiLeaks, their release. On that time, President Trump, then candidate Trump, made a direct appeal in front of the cameras to get Hillary Clinton's emails that she had deleted or had been deleted for her from her private server. Take a listen.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Now, the indictment does not mention that statement from candidate Trump, but it does note, as you just pointed out, that on that very same day, the Russians made their first effort to break into Hillary Clinton's private email server. Do you suspect that Mueller and his team put that in there to highlight that the Russians might have been doing what candidate Trump wanted them to do?
Absolutely. You know, it could be a coincidence that the Mueller team puts the same date in action, that same date in the indictment, but it can't be a coincidence that they actually put the time of day. Why is that significant unless you're comparing it to the time when Donald Trump made that statement? And I think it shows another thing, Jake, and that is the Russians had to wonder whether this intervention, even on Trump's behalf, might backfire on the Russians, whether it might be rejected by the Trump campaign. Certainly if John McCain had been the nominee, Russian intervention on McCain's behalf would have been rejected by McCain, would have hurt the Russians. But here they get a clear signal from the president, the candidate Trump at the time, yes, we would welcome your help, Russians, and they waste no time in trying to provide that help. And I think going into this meeting within the next 24 hours, Trump can't contain his admiration for Putin, but more than that, Trump views Putin as his benefactor. After all, Putin intervened. These Russian military intelligence officers were not acting on their own. Putin intervened to help Trump, and Trump is nothing if not grateful for that help.
All right, Congressman Schiff.
So you also got a lot of good information in there from Adam Schiff supporting my title that this is the Trump Loves Russia Act 2, and there is going to be an Act 3. That was the answer to the first softball question. As a former prosecutor, how does this indictment look to you? And then after Adam Schiff actually mentioned the whole July 27th coincidence in his answer, Jake Tapper's follow-up was, yeah, what about that July 27th thing? So that was not Jake Tapper's finest hour, though I enjoyed listening to the answer, and there's a lot of good information in there, as I discussed before I showed the clip. And I mentioned how John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, canceled his appearance on State of the Union. Well, he actually did appear over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, although he was actually interviewed by Jonathan Karl, a guest host. I guess George Stephanopoulos is off in Helsinki, and Jonathan Karl did this interview with John Bolton, which actually what was revealed here, and I had heard it like in news reports earlier, the facts revealed are more damning than any defense that John Bolton is giving of the Trump administration. The thing that he reveals in here that I heard in previous news reports is that Donald Trump, before he went on this trip, was already briefed about this coming indictment. So, like, all those things he said about there being, a witch hunt at that press conference, he already knew about the indictment. At the news conference on Friday, you could give him, like, the benefit of the doubt. It was before the indictment when he called the whole thing a witch hunt. But no, he knew it was coming. And I don't know if it stretches all the way back to what Daniel Forrester was talking about, that maybe that's why they put Giuliani back on the news programs last week. But that is definitely something that John Bolton confirms in this interview with Jonathan Karl, and I'll discuss. He even shows like the witch hunt clip here, which I will talk about with you after we watch. This is about 2 minutes, 10 seconds from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning here.
This summit comes just after Robert Mueller's indictment of 12 Russian intelligence officials. Does the president feel blindsided or undermined by the timing of that indictment coming just as he's about to sit down with President Putin?
No, quite the contrary. The president was briefed on this indictment coming. I spoke with him about it. He was perfectly prepared to have it come before the meeting with Putin. I would say, in fact, it strengthens his hand. It shows that the justice system, the Department of Justice, are aware of these Russian efforts at election meddling. And I think the president can put this on the table and say, this is a serious matter. We need to talk about it.
Now, let me play you something that the president said at his joint press conference with Theresa May.
I call it the rigged witch hunt. I think that really hurts our country, and it really hurts our relationship with Russia.
So I'm trying to understand here. You said that this indictment strengthens the president's hand, and yet, even after he was briefed on what was happening, he called it a rigged witch hunt. Is he suggesting that there is anything illegitimate about this indictment?
I think what he's suggesting is that his political opponents in the United States for well over a year and a half have been trying to say that somehow he's a dupe of the Russian intelligence services, that he's an agent of the Kremlin, that he's been compromised by Russia, that he's linked to Russia, that he takes orders from Vladimir Putin. I mean, really, the conspiracies are about as obscure as you can imagine, and just subjects of people's imagination. That's what he's talking about. This indictment, a product of the Department of Justice, presumably met the Department of Justice guidelines, which say that prosecutors have to believe that it's more or less substantially more likely than not that they can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt as to every element of the offenses being charged. And that, I think, is what strengthens the president's hand going into Vladimir Putin. That's the strength of the evidence that the department has accumulated. That's what he has to answer.
I don't know. I don't know if I really believe anything that John Bolton says, and maybe not his mustache either. No, I don't know why I said that, but I think I pretty much critiqued that clip before I showed it as to because I have to applaud ABC and Jonathan Karl and the producers there for actually showing the Friday news conference clip where Donald Trump called it, a rigged witch hunt, even though he knew these indictments were coming. That is, I don't know what to make of that exactly. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And the other place I wanted to give Jonathan Karl some credit is the next two clips are two different Democratic senators named Chris. There's Chris Murphy from Connecticut and then Chris Coons from Delaware. First one on ABC, Real News Network, and then over on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace. In both these clips, they talk about whether Donald Trump has been hard on Russia, whether he's been tough on Russia, whether and you'll see first when Jonathan Karl starts with Chris Murphy, lets him to respond to what you just saw from John Bolton, and he has kind of a funny line about the president that John Bolton described in that last clip. But then you'll see in the follow-up, Jonathan Karl brings up, even though Donald Trump's words haven't been critical of Putin, the actions of the Trump administration, some could argue, have been tough on Russia, which you'll see in the Fox News clip that follows. Chris Wallace actually states as a fact, well, the fact is Trump has actually been tougher on Russia than Obama, which, I mean, that's not a fact. That's a judgment based on evidence. And I think in this first clip, you'll see Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator from Connecticut, does a pretty good job of explaining why Trump hasn't really been that tough on Russia after he first, like I said, makes a good joke about the president that John Bolton claims to serve over in this ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip. Jonathan Karl interview again over here.
We heard John Bolton say that this indictment strengthens the president's hand and that the president will confront Donald Trump on this. Do you believe him?
So I'd like to know the name of the president that John Bolton thinks he works for, because he's not describing President Trump. President Trump went on TV after the indictment was issued and called the investigation once again a hoax. He has already said that he has asked Putin about meddling. Putin told him he didn't do it, and he believed him. And so it just belies common sense that the president of the United States, this president, is going to sit down across from Putin and press him hard on the issue of Russian meddling. He knows that he benefited from it. He asked them to do it, and he knows that he still stands to benefit. What we have been told by the intelligence services in this country is that the Russians are trying to interfere again in the 2018 election. And what I believe is that President Trump knows ultimately that that could accrue to his benefit and to his party's benefit. He is simply not going to raise this issue as strongly as he should, if at all, with Putin, which is why many of us think that this summit should stand down.
So what should he do?
Well, what he needs to do is to not be pushed into sanction action by Congress. He needs to come to us and ask for more funds to stand up electoral defenses. He's done none of that. We have had to essentially bludgeon the president into issuing sanctions, and the Congress has had to appropriate money to try to shore up our electoral defenses. And then he has to say, frankly, what Chris Christie just said. He has to come out and use the strongest language possible to describe these attacks, and he hasn't. He has just so far tried to explain away his participation in it or Americans' participation in it.
But let me ask you, when you listen to the president's words, there's no question they are conciliatory towards Vladimir Putin. But if you look at what he has actually done, what his administration has actually done, you could certainly make a strong case that he's been tougher than the Obama administration. Look, selling lethal weapons to Ukraine, which Obama refused to do. 60 Russian diplomats expelled following the poison attack in the UK. Imposing sanctions the Treasury Department had to impose on 213 Russian-related entities. And, of course, airstrikes twice against Syria, another thing that the Obama administration stopped short of. Can't you argue, based on the facts, that he's actually been pretty tough? His administration's been pretty tough on Russia?
So his record here is admittedly very muddled, but let's also remember that much of what he did with respect to sanctions, he was pressed to do by Congress, and in fact, he fought many of the sanctions powers that we gave him. At the same time, he has invited Russia back into the G7 without any preconditions. He has walked America off the Middle East playing field, leaving diplomacy in Syria to the Russians. He has potentially decimated the State Department, which is one of the primary means by which we push back against Russia in and around their periphery. So for as many places in which he has taken some strong actions, there are plenty of other places in which he has essentially ceded the field, especially around Russia's periphery, to Putin and the Kremlin.
You and other Democrats have also been tough.
So, as I explained pretty clearly and extensively before I showed that clip, Chris Coons not only gave a good joke about, what president does he think he's serving, or what president is he describing. That's not the President Trump who responded to this indictment by calling it a hoax or whatever, but witch hunt, rigged witch hunt, I think it is. So it's not, I guess he was incorrect about hoax. It's rigged witch hunt, which is very different than hoax. Sorry about that, Chris Murphy. But then I think Jonathan Karl put together a persuasive, strong argument that Trump's been tougher on Russia than Obama. But part of that's because Congress has kind of forced him, as Chris Murphy explained, and that's somewhat different than the clip I explained I was going to show next. This is the final Fox News Sunday clip before the final clip, which is Rand Paul giving some weird isolationist Republican view of why Russia's not really the bad guy, that at least has some intellectual consistency, unlike Donald Trump. But that's the last clip before, of course, the bonus Sandy and Dash clip. But before I get to that, here's a 2-minute clip. Chris Wallace talking to the other Democratic Chris Coons of Delaware, stating the fact that Trump is tougher on Russia than Obama ever was, and getting a somewhat weaker response from Chris Coons of Delaware, but some of the same facts, and also mentioning the whole G7 debacle, which I think is important over here.
President Trump has refused to rule out accepting the annexation of Crimea by Russia. And here's what he had to say about Putin's actions in that part of the world.
This was an Obama disaster. And I think if I were president then, he would not have taken over Crimea.
The fact is, Senator, that President Trump has...
Oh, you know what? The weird thing is, at the very beginning of this, and I'm sorry to make you rewatch the beginning of the clip, but you notice how Chris Wallace just sneaks in that fact that came from the John Huntsman interview, that Donald Trump refuses to rule out letting Vladimir Putin keep Crimea. And it's like this weird whiplash in the question. By the time he gets to the end of the question, he's defending Donald Trump and saying he's tougher than Obama at the beginning, it doesn't match the beginning of this question at all, which I forgot to mention. Sorry, now you can watch that clip with me over here.
President Trump has refused to rule out accepting the annexation of Crimea by Russia. And here's what he had to say about Putin's actions in that part of the world.
This was an Obama disaster. And I think if I were president then, he would not have taken over Crimea.
The fact is, Senator, that President Trump has been tougher than President Obama when it comes to dealing with Russia, especially on the sanctions issue and the Crimea issue and others. He's issued more sanctions. He's expelled more diplomats. And he also has sent lethal aid to Ukraine, which President Obama refused to do.
Chris, I supported the provision of lethal aid to Ukraine. I visited Ukraine, and they are very nervous about what might happen between President Trump and President Putin. I'll remind you that one of the strong steps that President Obama did take was getting our allies to expel Russia from the G8, to reduce it to the G7. And in the recent G7 meeting, President Trump said perhaps Russia should rejoin. I would support our reducing sanctions on Russia, allowing them to rejoin G8 if they took the steps they must take to withdraw their forces from eastern Ukraine, to undo the illegal annexation of Crimea. But to simply waive that, to say it is somehow all Obama's fault and let's move forward, would be to weaken our vital allies in Europe who have joined us in sustaining tough sanctions against Russia. I commend President Trump for the steps he has taken, but to simply wave this off as Obama's fault misses the vital historical context here. President Putin is the first Russian leader since Stalin to expand their territory. We can't allow this to go unchallenged.
Senator, I got less than a minute left, and I want you to...
So, anyway, I explained that to death before I showed it. I explained it before I showed the clip. I explained it before I showed the clip before that, so I don't want to spend a lot more time talking about it, but I think you saw what I claimed you were going to see there, that Fox News Sunday stated as a fact that Trump was tougher on Russia than Obama was, and Coons, Chris Coons from Delaware did a good job, but not as good a job as Chris Murphy, in my opinion. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I have one more final clip that I talked about earlier. This is Senator Rand Paul talking to Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union, and I actually have edited together two different parts of the interview here, which is something that they did on State of the Union anyway. In the later live version, they edited down the interviews. They didn't even show that Mark Warner clip where he was talking, responding to what Michael Hayden said about the next shoe to drop being the Americans who are going to be indicted. That didn't make it into the 9 a.m. State of the Union. That another one of my criticisms that I forgot to give earlier. But this is actually an interesting look at where Republicans could go in an isolationist way. This is Donald Trump sounded like he might be an isolationist, and then he brought in all these neocons, and now it's hard to tell. You know, it's muddled, as Chris Murphy said. His policy towards Russia is muddled, but this is sort of the coherent isolationist, or I believe people who are supporters of Rand Paul don't like the word isolationism. They call it non-interventionism. And some of this actually makes sense. You'll see at the beginning, Rand Paul talks about how, well, you know, the United States has intervened in a lot of other countries' elections, and that's true. And if you're from some third world country in South America or Central America, or if you're talking about what the U.S. did in Iran and other places in the Middle East, I mean, there are all sorts of places where what Rand Paul is saying, I would buy it a lot more than Russia, which has been a bad act, almost as bad an actor, and often a much worse actor than the United States over many years. Especially the KGB, which, well, I don't want to go into all of that, but you'll see here Rand Paul not only talks about how intervention in elections, there's some sort of, it's not morally equivalent, but, we all do it. And there's something to it, but not as much as Rand Paul's making. And then he also talks about how, expansion of NATO is sort of, chicken. I actually cut out part of the clip. You'll see that Jake Tapper talks about chicken and the egg, and that's because I cut out part where Rand Paul says, well, it's chicken and the egg. Is it NATO or Russia who started the conflict? Because in the clip that I do show here, he says, James Baker under George H.W. Bush promised Gorbachev that they wouldn't move 1 inch beyond Germany when Germany was unified. Now they're all the way up to Russia's borders. And the thing is that all of the expansion of NATO has been done democratically, and the expansion of Russia has been done through, military adventurism and well, anyway, that's my opinion, and that I will talk a little more about it after we see the more, I guess, intellectually cohesive, the internally consistent, more than what you hear from Donald Trump. This is where Republicans could go in the isolationist. That's what America First used to be before World War II. It was isolationism. Now it's Rand Paul's non-interventionism, explained in this 6-minute final news clip before I end the show, which I will discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
Tomorrow's Trump-Putin summit is causing anxiety among some Republicans, fears that President Trump might give too much away or not be tough enough. But Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, says President Trump's doing the right thing by meeting face-to-face. He sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and joins me now from his home state of Kentucky. Senator Paul, thanks so much for joining us, as always. Just 48 hours ago, the U.S. government, the Trump administration, said that top Russian military intelligence officers orchestrated a massive hack to affect the U.S. election. How much do you want President Trump to try to hold Putin accountable for that?
I think really we mistake our response if we think it's about accountability from the Russians. They're another country. They're going to spy on us. They do spy on us. They're going to interfere in our elections. We also do the same. Dov Levin at Carnegie Mellon studied this over about a 50-year period in the last century and found 81 times that the U.S. interfered in other countries' elections. So we all do it. What we need to do is make sure our electoral process is protected. And I think because this has gotten partisan and it's all about partisan politics, we've forgotten that really the most important thing is the integrity of our election.
It sounds as though you are saying that the United States has done the equivalent of what the Russians did in the 2016 election, and it might sound to some viewers that you're offering that statement as an excuse for what the Russians did.
No, what I would say is it's not morally equivalent, but I think in their mind it is. And I think it's important to know in your adversary's mind the way they perceive things. I do think that they react to our interference in both their elections. They were one of the reasons they really didn't like Hillary Clinton is they found her responsible for some of the activity by the U.S. in their elections under the Obama administration. So I'm not saying
but surely,
it's morally
Senator Paul,
equivalent.
the United States has never done. The United States has never done what Russia did. Yeah. Okay, go on.
I'm not saying they're equivalent or morally equivalent, but I am saying that this is the way the Russians respond. So if you want to know how we have better diplomacy or better reactions, we have to know their response. But it's not just interference in elections that I think has caused this nationalism in Russia. Also, I think part of the reason is we promised them when James Baker, at the end, when Germany reunified, we promised them that we wouldn't go 1 inch eastward of Germany with NATO. And we've crept up on the borders, and we still have neocons in both parties who want Ukraine and Georgia to be in NATO. That's very, very provocative, and it has stimulated and encouraged nationalism in Russia. George Kennan predicted this. In 1998, when we still had Yeltsin and Russia was still coming in our direction, he said, if you push NATO up against Russia's borders, nationalism will arise and their militaristic tendencies will increase, and you may get someone like a Putin, basically. George Kennan predicted the rise of Putin in 1998. And so we have to understand that for every action we have, there is a reaction. And it's a big mistake for us not to say that we're morally equivalent or anything Russia does is justified, but if we don't realize that everything we do has a reaction, we're not going to be very good at understanding and trying to have peace in our world.
I want to get to NATO in a second, but just to underline this point about what the United States should do in response to the Russian election interference. In a new interview just this morning, President Trump said he, quote, hadn't thought of asking Putin to extradite those 12 Russian military intelligence officers. Do you think President Trump should ask for the extradition when they meet tomorrow?
I think it'd be a moot point. I don't think Russia's sending anyone back over here for trial, the same way we wouldn't send anybody over there for trial. No country with any sovereignty or sense of sovereignty is sending anybody to another country for trial. I think we have to protect ourselves. So because we waste time saying, well, Putin needs to admit this and apologize, he's not going to admit that he did it, and we can't take with on face value anything they tell us. We have to assume, and if we have proof that they did it, which it sounds like we did, we should now spend our time protecting ourselves instead of sort of having this witch hunt on the president. If the president was involved, by all means, put the information forward. There is no evidence so far of the president's involvement at all in this, so I think we need to be done with this so we can start actually protecting our elections from foreign countries.
Well, you just called this a witch hunt, but if it were not for this probe, I just think there are a lot of people out there who would be surprised to hear a sitting United States Senator describe Russia versus NATO in terms of confrontation and expansion as a chicken or egg proposition, given the fact that NATO protects sovereign countries while allowing them to remain sovereign, while Russia invades other countries and takes over those countries. I don't think it's chicken or the egg.
Well, what I would say is that there were people, and probably the greatest diplomat of the last century was George Kennan, and he did predict as NATO expanded that you would incite militaristic tendencies and nationalism in Russia. I'm not justifying Russia's aggression in Ukraine or in Georgia. I'm not saying they are equivalent. I am saying, though, that the provocation of pushing NATO forward after we promised, James Baker promised Gorbachev in 1990 when Germany unified that we would not go, the West would not go 1 inch beyond Germany. And yet, a couple years later, under the Clinton administration, we kept pushing. And so for every action that we put out there, there is a reaction. And I think we need to think this through. And it's not a moral equivalency. It's not justifying Russia's behavior. But it is realizing that from Russia's perspective, they see NATO expansion as a threat, and that part of their militarism and part of their nationalism may be inherent to the tides of the current century there. But it's also in reaction to policy from the West as well.
Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, we thank you for your time as always, sir. Good to see you.
So one of the reasons I edited that clip together that way is there was something in there that sort of exemplifies the way Rand Paul says some things that make sense, and then he goes off into like Wackyville, or he says something that makes like no sense. There was part of that where all of a sudden he like mispronounced the word sovereignty. I think he said like sovereignty. He said sovereignty like twice about halfway through that clip, and I edited it because you notice when Jake Tapper was watching him say it, I think he kind of noticed that he mispronounced the word sovereignty, and he then in his follow-up that I included in that clip about the chicken and the egg thing that I cut out, I showed Jake Tapper he like specifically uses the word sovereign. Although he didn't actually say sovereignty, but I think it was sort of like a subtle dig at Rand Paul's making up the word sovereignty or whatever it was he said about halfway through that clip. So anyway, that's why there were some edits in that clip, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have left out what Rand Paul said about the chicken and the egg, but whatever. It was 6 minutes long already. I hope you enjoyed the way I edited that clip and the way I picked out all 12 of the clips that I've shown today. I basically started off at 6 a.m. this morning, and it's now 7 p.m. in the evening, so that's like 13 hours of work. So I appreciate, for example, the super chat contributions I've gotten during the live show here. I noticed thank you, Lulu Girl and Sexy Bob. And I know Sexy Bob likes when I include the cat with the dog in the bonus Sandy clip at the end. And so I do have Sandy and Dash, as I promised. The difference being Sandy is lying right there, well, moved a little bit, but pretty much in the position that you see her in this clip that I took before the show started, like over an hour ago. Dash, on the other hand, like briefly appeared. I captured the moment, and Dash is long gone, and So that's the difference between dogs and cats, I guess. And here's a 30-second plus clip of Sandy coming in and then Dash peeking in over here. So there you have it. The Sandy and Dash clip for the Sandy and or Dash fans out there. The puppy, the kitten. I actually almost showed a use of puppy in a clip. There was multiple references to the way Vladimir Putin used his big black Labrador as a way to intimidate Angela Merkel when she came and talked to him, because Angela Merkel is famously afraid of puppies, apparently. So there is some negative puppy diplomacy coming out of Russia. That I didn't take any of those clips, but that's something you should be aware of if you're a fan of the puppies out there, that Vladimir Putin uses his puppy to intimidate Angela Merkel from Germany. So that's one of the sad things I learned this week. I don't know if you're sad or happy about the clips I picked out and the facts you learned this week, but I will be back again next week and every week for the foreseeable future. I didn't cover some topics that were covered. The Supreme Court Justice that we were talking about last week, they ended up nominating Brett Kavanaugh, who turns out I went to college with. He's Yale class of 87, and I started with the class of 87, and he was actually in my residential college, Ezra Stiles College, so not that I knew him, but he looks familiar. I think he may have known my freshman college roommate who turned out to be a Catholic priest in New Jersey. But that is a subject for a future Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup, maybe when Brett Kavanaugh goes through his hearings in the Senate. That'll be another topic, but it looks like we've gotten to Act 2 of the Robert Mueller investigation indictments. Act 3 will be called The Americans, just in time for, they just finished the series about the Americans with Kerry Russell, and from who I've been a fan of since Felicity days, and now I'm going way off on tangents, so I should probably finish the show. And I appreciate all of you who joined me live, all of you who are my patrons on Patreon, which you can see down in the video description. I have links for that, to support my show through PayPal. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.